I just want to go into the fundraising challenges, and I think one of the things that is really important for us to think about is like as an organization, do you have the capacity to do fundraising, right? Because fundraising requires a lot of energy, a lot of time. And so sometimes I think what's important to do is when we're applying for initial grants, it might be more important to think about applying for a fund that will allow you to hire somebody that could support your fundraising abilities, right? To increase your capacity to actually fundraise. Because if you're the ED or you're the only staff person and you're trying to run this organization, trying to do this work, it's going to be very difficult for you to also be looking for grants and looking for funding and all of those pieces. But you do actually need dedicated time that's going to allow you to build that database, apply for those grants, search for funders, and all of those pieces. Because as much as you can come to a workshop like this, or some of the workshops that like Ryan is offering, for example, it's still going to be up to you as the organization to find the funding that is the right fit. That might not be grants. It might be the individual campaigns. It might be all of these other pieces. But if you're unable to really have the time to dedicate to actually doing the fundraising work, then your fundraising initiatives will likely not be successful. Sorry, Amir, are you getting when people are in the waiting room? Because I'm getting them and I don't know if I should be admitting them or not.
Yeah, I'm admitting them. You just
Okay. I always recommend in the beginning of your in looking for funding, one of the things that you might want to consider doing is actually bringing in writing a grant or an application or looking for in-kind funds to dedicate to having somebody who can dedicate some hours to actually building a database for you, setting up those Google links for those Google notifications for you, doing the work of creating that database, putting in the amounts you can apply for. All of that work makes it a little bit easier for you in the long run to actually apply for funding and to know when the fundings are coming up. Not to sort of be scrambling, always looking for funders if you just already have a database that exists. And there are databases that you can pay for, right? So there's one that's Imagine Canada, and you could pay for that database and you could search through that database and look for funders, and you can search by programming ideas and amounts and so on. But a database like that might be expensive for an organization that's just trying to start up, or any organization. A membership to that kind of database would be expensive, but you could actually build your own database. And so one of the, that's something where I suggest folks start in terms of really being able to minimize the effort and the time that you put in later around accessing funding or looking for funding, is to start with sort of like a database like that. The other thing that might help you to sort of navigate this challenge is if you just partner with some other organizations, and then you could all have access. You could all pay for like the Imagine Canada subscription, and then you can work together as different organizations, different grassroots organizations, or even bigger organizations to utilize that Imagine Canada database or some of these other databases that have all of the grants, and use that as a way to sort of share that cost. That might be another way for you to sort of navigate looking for funding and looking for grants. There's also a question around, and I was speaking to this a little bit before, but the trust from funders and grant history. If it's very difficult for folks to get funding when you can't necessarily demonstrate that granting history or that funding history that exists. And so partnering actually with organizations when you're looking for funding or applying for funds is a good way for you to sort of piggyback off of that organization and start utilizing partnerships as a way to build your funding history. So if you've never received a grant before, it's oftentimes very difficult to then access grants. And so what do you do in that case? Partnering and saying, you know what, like we can contribute this part to this part of the project, and getting your name in, getting in where you fit in terms of these grants, allows you to then sort of build that granting history that you can speak to later on when you're applying for funding. A lot of funders really are interested in show and prove. They want to see that you've done the work and that you are having some sort of impact. So again, if you're unable to demonstrate that, it still kind of makes it difficult for you. And I think one of the things that's frustrating for a lot of people is they'll put a lot of time writing this amazing grant application and then not get the funding. But what's happening on the other side with the funder is that they're looking at organizations that have a longer reputation, and they're comparing that to your organization who might not have that same reputation. And then they'll end up giving the money to the organization that has that reputation. So really thinking about those pieces and how you can leverage partnerships with other people in order to start building that history. And then there's the question of having a trustee. Sometimes, funders are looking for somebody who's going to vouch for you. So maybe they're willing to give you the money as the organization, but they're looking for or an organization that has not just a history, but has the financial like the fiscal responsibility, right? So what happens if who's going to manage the money, essentially, is the question that the funder is asking. And so that means you would have to find a trustee to work with you in order for you to actually access those funds. Normally, if a trustee will ask for a fee in order to do some of that administration. But it's something that you should sort of think about when you're applying for funds. Does this funder need a trustee? And am I going to be able to actually to find an organization that could be a trustee for me? There's a question of time constraints and knowing when grants are due, or knowing when funding is due, and how much time you would invest in, writing a particular grant. And again, I say sometimes like the grants are not very clear in terms of how much, if you're going to be successful. Sorry.
That's Kemi, I'm sure. No?
I
thought it's Mali.
I'm sorry, can you give me 1 sec? Someone's at my door. I don't know.
Te interrumpió.
Inachi, can you mute yourself, please? Thank you.
While we wait for this,
we can talk. Hey, how are you? How is it going for everyone? Yeah, sorry, Kemi, you were saying something?
No, I was just doing a quick check-in, but Evelyn is back, so I'll take
sorry,
it
I'm
after. Okay.
Sorry about that. Right. So, I was talking about the time constraints question and how you sort of navigate that, especially a lot of grants will be due around the same time of the year, or they take a lot of work, putting in a lot of work into the grant. And I guess the question is it worth it? And so, that initial contact with the funder to get a sense of what they are looking for, and the amount, what they are looking for, how much each grant do they typically give out for each grant. One of the things that's very useful to do is check the funder's website, look at the projects that they have funded in the past, and see if your project is similar to those projects and what are the amounts that they've given to people. And most funders will have that information on their website, where you can look at, they funded this project in the past funding year, and these were the amounts of the projects that they funded. And so that will give you a sense of also like, is going through this application process worth my time? Is the amount of money that I might get worth my time? So even though the total funding bucket might be $5 million, the maximum they might give per project might be small, so small that it's not necessarily worth your time to apply for that funding. And so I think just looking at some of those pieces, checking the funders' websites, and really getting a sense of the kinds of projects, the amounts that they usually use to fund that they're usually giving out to organizations, the kinds of organizations that they fund. When the organizations are listed on the website, going and looking at the organization, seeing if it's a larger or smaller organization, that will give you sort of like insight in terms of whether or not this funder is for you, or if it makes sense for you to move ahead with this kind of initiative. And then there was the question around the funding restrictions, which I think I've already addressed. But again, like the difficulty with a lot of the government funding is that there is a lot of restrictions. There is a lot of programming restrictions. I know I've written a lot of grants, especially when I was at Delta, where they wouldn't pay for staff time, right? Like it would say you could apply for supplies or programming costs, but not staff time, or you can't give out honorariums, for example. So there's all of these restrictions that sometimes make it impossible for you to, or it feels like it's impossible for you to actually run the programming. And that's where I would really suggest thinking about the individual sponsorship, the individual fundraising side of things, and the corporate fundraising side of things, which is, again, I think it's really untapped. In terms of, most people will lean towards the government funding and sort of neglect that individual campaigns or the corporate campaigns, but that will really allow you to sort of navigate some of the funding restrictions that come with the government, with the government funding.
Can I just add in a bit here? Because really, the funding, quite often we only think about government funding, and that's, I'm truly a person who tends to think that way. But your hands are really tied in terms of what you can or cannot do. So that's why the diversification is really important, and trying to find other sources of funds as well to augment or support the work that you want to do. So one funder may only give you funding for a big part of what you want to do. But if, as Evelyn said, you had a few dollars in another pocket, when you have money in one pocket, or some in your brassiere, some in your shoe, well, think of it as that. You want to do different things. And so you use different resources and sources to be able to cover the big picture and the objective is to do what you want to do.
Exactly. And I think I noticed that there was a question even around like grants for businesses. And I can actually share some resources around grants for businesses. I don't know why I didn't think that was sort of a part of the scope. I'm used to really the nonprofit sector in terms of grants, but there are a lot of grants for businesses, particularly coming out of COVID, and really sort of like thinking about those pieces. But a lot of those grants also come with having to do a program. Even, for example, I think Summer Company, as Ryan mentioned, you do have to go through a program and commit a certain amount of time in order to get some of those grants for businesses. But also, I think one of the things I've also noticed with grants for businesses is that they're oftentimes wanting the business to already be established, to already have staff. I find a lot of funders don't do grants for businesses that are just starting up, and mainly because there's the idea that businesses tend to fail in their first year of starting up or first couple of years of starting up, and so that makes it it's less likely that funders will support businesses that are already starting up, but they do tend to support businesses who have some sort of who've been around for a while in terms of some of the grants that I've seen. I do have some resources around that too that I can share, because I did see it as a question that came up in the chat.
In the chat?
No, I saw the
Somebody had asked about business,
Yeah, somebody asked about it. I was just responding to that.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to move on to sort of thinking about some tips. So staying on top of what's happening with grants is really important. So the Google Alerts suggestion, that's one of the things I have set up on my computer. You could just set up some keywords, and I think I saw in the chat there, Kemi, you said that you'd be walking through that process.
Correct.
Amir's going to walk them through it after.
Okay, awesome. And so, yeah, that's something that you can probably take care of today, but setting up those Google Alerts will definitely be helpful. Sometimes it's like you're getting a lot of information that's not helpful, but you will get that alert for that funding opportunity that you were looking for. And it's better to be in the know, part of that inner circle, rather than relying on somebody else to forward you that grant. The other thing that I shared with Amir, there's a listserv. It's the Youth Justice listserv. I don't know if folks are on it, but I'm on that listserv. And a lot of times that's where I actually get notifications for grants. It's the listserv that is, I think the name is like Orville.
Yeah,
there's a lot of
I'll share the email ID in the chat.
Yeah, but I also put the link to sign up
as well. Okay.
Yeah, it's there in the document. So if you can put that in the chat as well. But a lot of funding opportunities go through this listserv. It's a really huge listserv. It's very relevant to our sector. And so definitely, I think if you can sign up for that listserv, you'll get a lot of other things, but you will also get funding opportunities for sure. And then there's the grants directories that I talked about. So Grant Connect, Imagine Canada. And so you could subscribe monthly, and then you'll be able to utilize that search engine in order to look for grants. Oh yes, there is actually, yes, I just remember there is a limited free version that you can find at the library. And so, there's always these databases. The databases tend to have any and everything. So they're very, very broad. So again, it's going to require some work on your part in order to find a grant that's specific for you that, would be useful to you. But that's another option there. And then, unfortunate to say, sometimes you really do have to rely on professionals within the sector in order to get access to the funding opportunities, or the knowing where you can find the funding. A lot of the bigger organizations do have a fundraising team, have a professional grant writer on staff. And of course, smaller organizations can't do that, but that does mean that grant writing and fundraising is a particular kind of skill set. Most of us kind of approach it as if it's something that we can just figure out on the fly. It's not, right? Like, it is a very specific kind of skill set to find grants, find funding, create funding campaigns, look for funder, and then actually write that granting application. It is a specific kind of professional skill set, which means, if as an individual who's doing a bunch of other stuff, you might not be good at it, right? And so you could attend all of these kinds of workshops, which are helpful, but sometimes you might have to pivot and say, you know what, do we have the ability to invest in maybe a professional just to help us sort of like maybe build this database or get us off of the ground, and start thinking about things in that, utilizing that professional in order to, get you to where you need to be. Because, I find a lot of people do the grant writing and the funding off the side of their desk. And again, it means you can't really give it the focus and the intention that it needs. And then you're going to get frustrated because maybe you're applying for the grants, but you're not getting them and you don't understand why, when there is like really a method behind grant writing and fundraising. And so, if you do have that, it might require you looking at your, budget and saying, can we actually allocate some resources to this? Because it will help you to sort of get some of the grants that might allow you to, that will allow you to do more work, the work that you want to do.
And sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to ask if you wanted to take a little break and have Amir to show people how to set up the Google alert now.
Sure. No. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, just give people a break. Okay, Amir.
I'll stop sharing.
Okay.
Give me one moment, okay?
Okay.
And so this is something I've actually wanted to learn how to do myself. I've heard about it, but I think it's great. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so share your screen. All right. Okay, so the Google alert, what you need to have at first is definitely a Google account, a Gmail account. Can everyone see my screen?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, and I'm assuming that you have a Google account, okay?
Right.
So what you need to do, just go to your browser. You can use Google Chrome or whatever browser you are using, and then search google.com. And in the search bar, just search Google Alert. So the first link you will see, Google Alert, monitor the web for interesting new content. Or the second one you can use as a help if you want to learn how to do it. The first alert is basically the main link where you're going to go and set it up. So I'm clicking here. Okay, now alert, you see, monitor the web, create an alert about. So in this box, you will basically key in the search, the words that you want to put in. So when Google sees any kind of announcements containing those words, it immediately sends you an alert. So I'm putting in fund. Okay, so you see alert preview and the bottom, it's showing already fund houses, buy up. So whatever related to fund. So if you shortlist that term creatively, then I think you will actually extract the exact information you may need. For example, instead of just fund, because fund can be various kind of funds as well, right? So maybe you can put youth opportunities fund. I mistyped the spelling, I guess. Okay. And then in the next box, enter the email address that you want to select where Google will send you the alert. So I'm putting my Gmail ID. And then click create alert. Now, here's the thing, because you need to have a Google ID. And if you are not already signed in Google from your computer, if you're already in this screen you're seeing, it will not show up because you are already signed in. I signed out to show you all how this works. So when you click in, not signed in your Google, it will ask for your Google ID and password because it's asking you to sign into Google. So I put my ID, I put next, and don't expect I'm going to show you my passwords. I'm going to stop sharing for a while. Okay. Are you guys doing it with me? You can try.
No.
Yeah, you can go into your browser and do it. I think it's a great way to learn. Okay, so now I logged in. So I'm sharing the screen again because it's safe. So you see, I did put my password and ID. So I logged in. So on the right top corner, it will show my alphabetical characters that will actually ensure that I have logged in. So what I was saying, after you logged in, the Youth Opportunities Fund that I put in the search bar is still there. Okay. And it is now showing, which it was not showing in my previous screen, that this will create an email alert for Diver to do with my email ID. Okay. So create alert. Done. You see my alerts, Youth Opportunities Fund. Anything comes up on Google on relating to this topic, you will get an alert in your email. Now, how do I add more words? So now I can, so in the search box, individual words, how many words you want to add in, and just put in there and click my alert. So for example, let's say
can you put youth funding? Somebody was interested in youth funding.
Yeah, youth funding. Okay. And then create alerts. So you see, I have already 2 keywords. So how many keywords you want to add? Just type in there and put it in the list. Ontario Trillium Foundation. So just type in and then click alert. That's it. You are going to get the emails to your email ID. When you want to delete it, the same way, search Google Alert, log into your account. You will see this page and delete from this list. You see? On the right, delete.
Okay, great.
Good.
That's all.
Great. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Any questions or any confusions?
No.
Okay.
Back
All
to
right,
me.
Evelyn.
Okay, I wanted to show you all something really quickly here. So there is this, the Community Foundations of Canada, and it allows you to look for all the foundations that are, you can search by province or you can search by your postal code. So here I've already selected, and you'll get this website, but I'll also put it in the chat. but I've selected Ontario, and then what it will do is it'll list all the foundations in Ontario for you here. And so from there, you can start looking at, go to Toronto Foundation, for example, you could start looking at their funding opportunities. You know, some of them obviously it's all of Ontario. So Community Foundation of Mississauga, et cetera, et cetera. So this is one of the websites that is actually useful for searching for foundations. And so this is also one of the resources that you will get as well. But there is it's the Canadian Foundation is what it's called. And so they actually, Canadian Foundations of Canada, and they have, so they have listed all of the foundations that are in Canada, and you can search. And they also have granting opportunities as well. So this is one that's recent, the Indigenous Peoples Resilience Fund. So not only can you actually go look at the foundations, the foundations that are a part of the community foundations, you can also look at whatever funding that they might have as well. So I'm just going to share the presentation again. That's so weird why it always mutes me when I go to share.
Got you.
But you can hear, yeah, you can hear me
Yeah,
now.
we can hear you now. Yeah.
Okay, and so I think I was at the point of, again, I already mentioned, I think earlier on, in terms of looking at organizations similar to yours, seeing what logos or funders they have listed, and utilizing that as a way to find grants. And I think the last thing, and I mentioned this before, but really applying for funding to find funding. And so being honest with, you know, funders about administrative constraints and administrative needs is really important. So having somebody who could actually support with finding funding, looking for funding, and writing grants is a really invaluable skill set to your organization, especially in the early days. Once you sort of like have a couple of grants and a couple of funds under your belt, then that's not necessarily that important. But definitely in the early days, you want to invest into applying, into actually having the ability to apply for funds and being intentional about that. I used to be a grant writer for Family Services Toronto, and it was I was there full-time writing grants for them, and that's all I did. And so thinking about, you know, such a large organization, having like a dedicated person to just writing grants, and looking for grants, it really can be like a full-time job. And so if you're doing it off the side of your desk, excuse me, it's going to be hard for you. But obviously there's competing priorities if you have a very small team of staff and some of those pieces. But so maybe the first grant that you're thinking about, maybe the first funding that you're thinking about, is being able to bring on somebody with that skill set, even if it's for a couple of hours a week, in order to look for funds, look for funding, and apply for funds for you in order to just get a couple of grants under your belt. Oops. Okay, and that's it for the presentation.